I am JD, and this is Upfront and Personal. Carbon neutrality, net zero, it is all over the news and in many cases presented as if this would be a solution. And I am very skeptical about that, and maybe so are you. I asked Edwin Diender how digital transformation and digital skills can create the transparency we need, but also contribute to reducing carbon emissions, because that is what we need. Upfront and personal. Edwin, welcome back. I'm happy that the hot seat on Upfront and Personal was so good that you decided to come back. I have another topic for you today, and you mentioned it also in the previous session. Carbon neutral and net zero. I look at those things, and the moment I start researching them, I find a lot of greenwashing. I find a lot of, yeah, well, we did something bad here, but we did something good over there, so it's fine. And I translate that to make clear how much I disagree with that behavior by saying, well, we had a data breach, but it's okay because we protected data somewhere else. So we are data breach zero, or we are privacy neutral. And it doesn't work like that. And the second thing that makes me very skeptical is, wasn't the target that we emit significantly less carbon? So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on this topic, and how can digital help make this transparent, and how can digital actually contribute to less carbon instead of carbon neutral?
Well, in previous sessions, and in different forms and shapes of sessions, not only with you, but also in other sessions, one of the things that I coined a while ago is that, to the point which I agree with Thomas Friedman, who is a journalist and writer and author, who had a book, still has the book, by the way, called "The World is Flat." I could not agree more. I coined in the past, and I still do, that technology has no borders. Technology is very horizontal. It overlays as far as you would like to think of. And as such, it doesn't silo anymore, and it doesn't put things into compartments, and it doesn't put things into boxes and what have you. To the topic that you point out to, when it comes to carbon neutrality and zero net and what have you, the analogy can be made as well. What digital then allows us to do is to overlook and overlay these different silos, and creates the awareness and picks up on the thought that the carbon neutral thought shouldn't be shifted from, let's say, one pillar to another pillar, but should be considered in relationship to all the pillars that the horizontal layer then is part of or has created as a new digital foundation. So that is one. The second one, of course, sits with the goals and objectives and KPIs. I'm sure many of us in the different organizations that we're part of perhaps recognize a little bit that the thing that is related to KPI often becomes the target, and the target often becomes confused with KPIs. As long as we stick to a clear definition and we all agree to what that clear definition is, and this is why it is so important to have an inclusion of each and all and everyone. We all have to be on the same page, and we all have to agree what the measurement should be like, what the KPI is, and what goals and objectives are that go along with it, in order to be able to have a horizontal, holistic view on how and where an item like carbon neutrality and so on and so forth fits and measures itself up, and pushes things and does not push things away from the plate that has my responsibility. So I did it, I'm carbon neutral, and now it is to the next wave or the next stage in the value chain to take care of their side of the equation. And my plus is maybe higher up than the minus of someone else, and therefore they are more negative than I am. I agree with you, that should not be a right way to measure and to go forward with. So digital will help us create a stronger foundation for that, and also perhaps can be used as a more stable baseline in the, in the way we measure this and in the way we weigh this. Does that make sense if I put it like that?
It makes a lot of sense, Edwin, because I think we need two things. We need very clear transparency without maybe unconscious attempts of greenwashing. And we need also that we have a very clear understanding of who is doing what and where should we improve. Now, the one thing that I always am concerned about with KPIs is that we design KPIs to look good. I have an article on my website called Only Measure What Educates You, where I go into the details of this. And one thing that I learned over the years of being in lean manufacturing and related disciplines is the majorities of those KPIs are designed to, at one point in time, show that we made improvement, to show that we are actually doing quite good. And that's understandable. You don't get investors by saying, have a look at the list of problems that I have. You don't get your promotion or bonus payments by showing how wrong your decisions have been, right? Now, if we have a look at KPIs related to environment, related to sustainability, related to durability, I'm so happy that you introduced that as well, that sustainability and durability are basically tied to each other. And if we then design KPIs not to show how well we are, but to show where the next challenge is, that is when we start having the conversations about these items. Because otherwise we don't. If we have a 90% efficiency and we celebrate ourselves for having a couple of days per week with 90.1%, we will never look at the loss of 10%, right? How can digital make that happen? How can digital make that visible?
Well, digital, of course, has the capacity and the capability to visualize data. So if there is data available that we're using for all these measurements and for measuring how and where we are from a yardstick point of view, for example, in a KPI, a key performance indicator. So if we are measuring the performance against certain indicators, then we can visualize that with different forms of how data is capable of doing that. Pie charts, line diagrams, or maybe even 3D modeling and simulations and what have you. I think what is far more important is that we might need another indicator as well, and maybe also another target, because it seems that there is one or two things missing, and that sits with the traditional approach to something that maybe is not applicable anymore for something that we want to do today in order to have a better outcome tomorrow, for example. We need to think about or rethink about how to measure things that we don't have in place yet. Versus we got a measurement mechanism and let's see if we can apply this to the future or push the future back into that mechanism. What I mean by that is this. All KPIs are rather linear, right? How many carbon did we not use? How many % lower versus, that's a calculus. What we don't measure yet and what we might want to measure is what is the relationship between these different KPIs or these different measurements. Can we measure whether there is a relationship between KPI number 1 and KPI number 2? And can we measure whether the different stakeholders are living up to the expectation that they need to have a handover and there needs to be a responsibility in the handover, almost like a relay run of the 400-meter dash or the 1600-meter dash at the Olympics or what have you at a sports game, right? There is a specific KPI of each individual runner, but also there's a team KPI, and there's a KPI that measures how fast are you able to hand over this relay? What are the mechanisms that you need to put in place and the techniques that you have to follow to do that most efficiently in order to, add it all up, and then as a coach or as a trainer determine how to be faster and where to optimize and so on and so forth. I think in our industry, coming to this particular topic, we might want to do something like that as well that I think we don't do yet. Once we have that in place, I think it will be more clear and also more visual how and where we are able to optimize in the handover of things. I've done my part. I've done my part, which is measurable and it can be visualized. And in my handover to you, maybe I can hand over to you more efficient than I currently do. And in your retrieval, maybe you can retrieve in a more efficient way than you currently do. And then as you have it, your KPI comes in and then you can measure against that. But that particular part, that handover thing, the relational part between the A, the B, the C, and the D throughout the value chain, I think that is where the core of the item sits that you just referred to.
That is very interesting, Edwin, and it aligns very well with how I think about KPIs, but also how I think about the difference between planning the past and managing the future. And we see that in the supply chains as an issue. We see that in the energy market as an issue. There's a lot of focus on what happened yesterday, and we're basically planning tomorrow based on the information we got about yesterday. And we're not yet focused enough on managing the future with dynamic targets, with relations we do not understand yet. It could even be a KPI to learn to understand those relations. I think that's a wonderful conclusion of this session, Edwin. I'm happy to have you as a guest on Upfront and Personal, and I'm very pleased that you are willing to take the hot seat on topics that matter to all of us. Thank you, Edwin.
The stage has been set. All preparations are made. The challenge is accepted. Critical questions, real answers, cybersecurity, geopolitics, economy, sustainability. Question everything. Challenge the status quo and dare to see beyond the headlines. This is Upfront and Personal, with tough questions and real answers.
Dr. Ingenieur Johannes Drooghaag.